Welcome to European History with Dr. Brovkin. This is a new series which would be called AP European History with Dr. Brovkin. You could find it on YouTube as other my videos. And the unit that we're going to do now is called Renaissance. And there will be several units, several subunits that go under this rubric to Unit 1. And the first one is called Economic, Political, and Cultural Origins of Renaissance. So what we're going to do now is talk about why Renaissance happened and why Renaissance happened in Italy, of all places. Well, first, economic. Economic origins of Renaissance have to do with the fact that Europe developed in 11th and 12th and 13th centuries very quickly. It sort of began to catch up with the Middle East. So in a rough sense, you could say if you traveled in the Mediterranean in about the year 1000, you would see that the biggest cities where action was, that the biggest trading centers were not European. It would be Cordoba, it would be Jerusalem, it would be Alexandria, it would be Cairo, and it would be, of all the Christian cities, it would be Constantinople. And things are beginning to slowly shift in the 1200s, and especially in the 1300s. And you actually have the beginnings of non-North African and Middle Eastern cities that are coming up of age. That means that they are beginning to develop as trade centers, and the most important ones are Italian ones. Why Italian? Well, partly because of geography. Italy is the closest country to North Africa, to the Middle Eastern civilization, which is going through its fabulous golden age. So that is one of the reasons why Italy is in the center of it. The second reason is that Italy is the place of the Roman Empire. I mean, Italy is where you have all these monuments that are still there. You have the Colosseum, you have a whole lot of remnants of the Roman and Greek civilization that are a constant reminder that that's what it was like. So they're beginning to develop their city-states, their local government, they're beginning to open up universities, they're beginning to build squares for public assemblies, and it's not yet a nation in the sense of a modern Italy. It wouldn't come until the 19th century, but Italy does develop political authority in subunits, such as Florence, Milan, Naples, Rome, Siena, etc. And so they're all kind of like beginning to form as political entities that have their own trade. Now, trade is very, very important economic origin. And I'll give you an example. In those days, trade was a matter of, pretty much as today, private business. So you could have an Italian merchant who would have his own fleet, who would have his own flag, who would have his ships go to Alexandria in Egypt on a regular basis, who would have personal acquaintance of let's say, a caliph in Alexandria and a Byzantine emperor in Constantinople and a Jewish rabbi in Jerusalem. I mean, it would be that kind of a Mediterranean world. And of course, you would obviously have somebody in his business in Marrakesh representing his company. So Mediterranean was a kind of a interlinked through the sea, through trade, and that also created a lot of interchange that promoted the coming of Renaissance. One of the most important aspects of the origins of Renaissance is the Crusaders, and that's a big topic that we really should have more time to discuss. But in a nutshell, on this topic, it was encounter of civilizations of a great magnitude. When the Europeans in the 11th century went to conquer Jerusalem and held it for almost 100 years, and then they held other Middle Eastern cities, Tyre and others, for another 100 years. So it's a 200 years presence in the 1100s and 1200s, presence of Europeans in Middle East. That is absolutely incredible impact on their mentality. One thing that they discovered, as we all know, is that these are places that were more civilized than they were. They were non-Christian and they were civilized, which is kind of an incredible discovery. They were cities where had waterworks, where had pumps, where they had huge libraries and mosques, I mean universities, schools, hospitals. I mean, like, it was something that did not exist of Europe of its day. It was a time when the Europeans discovered that they are behind, that the Middle East is a place of civilization, and they are kind of like from the provinces, and all they can do is kind of wave their steel weapons and ride a horse. So it was like awesome. It was like awesome. Wow. Open up their mouth. Wow. And they learned a whole lot of things. And they begin to interchange. And they begin to take baths. And to admire perfume. And to bring spices to Europe. And merchants make a ton of money on all these first spice trade. Europeans discover the Orient. And they love it. They absolutely love it so much that they want to conquer and hold it. That's the idea. Now they couldn't hold it because the Mongols came and kicked them out, and then Baybars and other rulers of Mamluk Egypt kicked them out even more. So they're gone. But the knowledge that there are all these nice things in the Orient remained, and that was one of the stimulus to rediscover knowledge. Now, in 1400s, there were Renaissance popes. One of them was St. Nicholas. I'll tell you about him later, who is an example of the origins of Renaissance. He commissioned ships to go to Constantinople, which was pretty much like in the last decades of its Christian existence, with instructions to buy anything at all in books at any price and bring it to Rome. He had the same instructions to go to Alexandria. In other words, there's a new phenomenon in Europe which is called quest for knowledge. The European elites, such as the popes and the Medicis and the rulers of these Italian states, they actually want not just wine and fun, or not just prayer and obedience as in the Middle Ages. They want knowledge. They want books. They want to know about things that are long forgotten, and not just Christian books. They want to have Aristotle and Plato and Sophocles, and they want to read novels. They want to read Greek plays. And you know what? The reason they could do that is because the Arabs saved those authors for them during the Golden Age. As you have studied last year, in the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, it was Arab scholars who translated these texts from Greek and Roman into Arabic, and the Greek and Romans didn't survive, but the Arabic did, and now they had to translate it back from what the Arab scholars had saved, Aristotle and Plato and other Greek authors, back to its original. So there's a meeting of cultures, and the Europeans are sort of borrowing from the West, from the East, rediscovering their own heritage, and this cultural exchange is one of the main sources of Renaissance in Italy. The next source is the political organization of these city-states, and the one that we will talk most about would be Medici, the Medici clan, and we will hear a documentary about the Medici. So they're a typical leading family. A leading family means they're rich, they're merchants, they're bankers, they're very modern. They have banks all over Europe. They have bank affiliations in Augsburg in Germany and in France and all over Italy. They have textile mills, and their textile business reaches out to Bruges in Belgium. So they're kind of like pan-European banking house. That's what they are. And that gives them a lot of connections and a lot of money and a lot of influence. And the influence buys politics, pretty much as in today's world. If you're rich and you have influence, you can run for a political office and probably get elected. And you have to be loved by your subjects, and to be loved by your subject, you have to do nice things for them. And that means you have to build new churches, and you have to build public squares, and make your city look good, and have cleaning services, and educational services, and hospitals. And then your townspeople are going to love you, and they're going to elect you to public office. And that's what happened to Medici, and they created a kind of a dynasty. But it was not a dynasty in terms of a kingship, in terms of French kings who passed power from one to another. It was a dynasty in a sense like Kennedy's. Like, you know, they like every one of those Kennedys separately, and then a political dynasty is created. The next Kennedy is not guaranteed anything. You have to earn it. So this is what happened from Cosimo Medici to his heirs. You have to keep on working on it and keep on earning the trust of your people so that they elect you. So in a sense, Medici sometimes is called a dictatorship because they were rough. I mean, they were pretty brutal. They would kill their opponents and poison. There was rough times. It was not democracy in our sense, even though today too people get killed and poisoned and all kinds of stuff, especially in Britain by some weird Russians. But the Medici wasn't a matter of course. I mean, you know, a dagger and a poison was a normal practice in those days. But you have to learn to please your people and have this sort of infrastructure of support, which they did, and they were elected over and over and over again for several generations. And then there were, of course, times when they were overthrown. In other words, Italian political system of the time is not a democracy in what we call democracy today, but it was a kind of a people's will did count. And in that sense, it was a democracy. What the people really wanted, and by the people we mean citizens of a city, the townspeople, the merchants, the artisans, their families, they had political needs like any other city at any place at any time. These needs are pretty similar: to have the cities clean, to have the cities safe, to have education for your children, to have opportunities for business, to have laws that are binding in business, sort of normal, regular procedures which the Medicis provided. And not only the Medicis, basically when you read about Italian cities, it was very, very similar, with some deviations, leading families in Milan and in Ferrara and in Naples, and of course in Rome it was the Pope. And the Pope had the power, not only the religious power, but the temporal power as well as a governor. So let me sum up. We're talking about today economic, political, and now religious. Let me just focus a little bit on religious origins, and then we're done with origins of Renaissance. Religious origins need to be examined in the sense that by the early 1400s, there were important events that took in the Christian church that kind of weakened the power and the authority and the respect of the church. And that was the time of two popes in the 1300s, when one of them was in France and the other in Rome. It was a rebellion of Jan Hus, who was a Czech nationalist leader who asked inconvenient questions about authority, about power of the Pope, about the fact that the Bible doesn't even mention the Pope. And then you basically begin to ask questions that Martin Luther asked later. Who gave the Pope the power to have that he has, especially the temporal power, to be the government of people? So the authority of the church began to be questioned by a variety of people, but mostly importantly, it's not the specific individuals with specific questions, but it's what the French call l'esprit de temps, which is the spirit of the times was much more relaxed, much more open, much more open to new ideas and feelings. And in a sense, it's kind of weakened the doctrinaire, medieval, pray to God and do nothing else approach. It created a new atmosphere. that didn't have any tangible results immediately, but it did have that atmosphere, made it possible for Renaissance artists to do what they began to be doing. Without that kind of a freedom and sense of security and patronage provided by the democratic governments of Siena and Florence and Pisa and Milan, you wouldn't have Renaissance. It's one of the most important reasons is that they did absorb culture. With culture, they absorbed tolerance, and with tolerance, they allowed and sponsored new artistic creation. Now, and finally, the bottom line is this. You could make an equation. The less religion, the more Renaissance. In other words, the departure from the strictures of medieval Christianity, the openness and the richness of these merchants and these cities created the class of people who will be the beneficiaries, the absorbers, the consumers of Renaissance art. And that is also one of the most important origins of Renaissance. Thank you.